Traditional geopolitical sanctions focus on visible industrial targets. They are designed to halt the movement of heavy machinery, freeze assets in multinational banks, and sever global supply chains. Academic research operates on a different premise. The ideal of open science relies on borderless collaboration, shared datasets, and the international exchange of scholars. Because of this collaborative culture, university administrators and researchers often assume their daily operations, hiring faculty, admitting students, and publishing research, fall outside the scope of trade laws that govern commercial exports. Hostile actors exploit this openness. They target university networks to bypass the very trade restrictions that block traditional industrial espionage. Under federal law, an unsecured university research lab failing to screen its international partners is as liable for a sanctions violation as a company smuggling prohibited hardware. In Canada, these interactions are governed by the Special Economic Measures Act, or CEMA. This legislation allows the government to restrict dealings with foreign states, individuals, and entities that breach international peace and security. The government has issued explicit directives regarding how these laws apply to education. This official guidance document for the academic and research sector warns post-secondary institutions to manage their specific sanctions risks. Universities are targeted because foreign students and visiting researchers are granted administrative privileges on campus networks and specialized research infrastructure. Under the guise of standard academic collaboration, this access facilitates covert activities. Hostile actors use these credentials to monitor digital traffic, exfiltrate raw data, and steal intellectual property. Canadian sanctions now explicitly regulate the transfer of intangible knowledge, making the oversight of data and expertise as legally significant as the movement of physical hardware. The most obvious rule of sanctions compliance is straightforward. Direct collaboration or financial transactions with a listed entity, a specific person or organization named on a sanctions list, is a legal violation. However, this guidance specifies that entering into or facilitating a transaction related to a listed person is prohibited, regardless of whether that transaction occurs through an unlisted third party. Consider Scenario 1. A Canadian university screens a faculty candidate who isn't on any sanctions list. However, background checks reveal they are currently funded by a sanctioned foreign university. By hiring them, the Canadian university is now indirectly facilitating a sanctioned organization. Scenario 2 applies this to institutional research. A Canadian college partners with a neutral foreign academic institution. A violation occurs if that partner simultaneously collaborates on similar research with a sanctioned institution. Data can leak across that secondary connection to the prohibited entity. A Canadian institution's legal liability extends through the hidden secondary networks of every international collaborator. Researchers often argue that fundamental research, such as basic chemistry or theoretical physics without specific industrial applications, poses a lower risk of violating trade laws. However, sanctions legislation explicitly prohibits the sale or supply of restricted goods, specifically targeting dual-use technologies that can be adapted for the manufacture of weapons. These restricted items are legally classified as export-listed goods. They include materials, software, and technology with both civilian and military applications. Providing technical advice, training, or assistance related to the manufacture or maintenance of an export-listed good is treated exactly like exporting the physical good itself. Government guidance highlights materials science as a high-stakes example. A breakthrough in advanced alloys might improve commercial aircraft, but could also be repurposed for missile construction. Sharing proprietary knowledge in these dual-use fields provides a sanctioned country with an immediate technological advantage. Before sharing applied data, researchers must determine if the technical advice or training will increase a sanctioned country's capacity to manufacture or maintain restricted goods. In the context of global sanctions, training a foreign actor to develop a restricted technology carries the same legal weight as exporting the technology itself. The threat of sanctions violations extends to the administrative, admissions, and financial offices of a university. International financial transactions, particularly philanthropic grants and large donations, often route through complex networks of heavily obscured digital nodes.
In Scenario 3, a university receives a large, unsolicited donation from an intermediary foundation. Standard verifications eventually reveal that the funds originated from a listed, sanctioned entity using the foundation as a financial shield. Accepting those funds without proper due diligence creates immediate legal and financial liability for the institution, even if the university did not knowingly solicit money from a sanctioned source. Admissions offices face similar operational hurdles with student recruitment and exchange programs, detailed in Scenario 4. A Canadian university admits a foreign student whose home academic institution is officially listed on a sanctions registry. This creates immediate operational gridlock. While studying in Canada, the student is legally prohibited from engaging with their own home administration, former professors, or classmates. If the student's home banking institutions are also listed entities, their financial transactions are frozen. They become entirely unable to pay Canadian tuition, buy food, or rent an apartment. An oversight in screening student affiliations or financial origins triggers federal penalties and can halt a university's basic financial and administrative operations. Canadian sanctions do not issue blanket bans against all citizens of a specific country from receiving an education or gaining employment. The law is specific. It targets transactions, dealings, and knowledge transfers with the individuals and entities listed on the official sanctions registries. To navigate this, the government mandates an active defense. This section of the guidance requires institutions to screen every proposed engagement against both the UN Consolidated List and the Canadian Autonomous Sanctions List. Universities must implement a formalized, dedicated sanctions compliance program rather than waiting for a violation to become obvious. That compliance program relies on staff identifying specific indicators, known as red flags, that should trigger an immediate halt to any academic transaction or hiring process. The official red flags page outlines behavioral and administrative indicators that suggest an individual may be attempting to circumvent sanctions. In academia, a documented history of transferring sensitive research data to entities operating within sanctioned countries serves as a primary warning sign. This due diligence process acts as a mandatory security filter, ensuring that international collaboration remains legally viable within the current regulatory environment. University administrators and lead researchers are the front line of this defense. Any suspected sanctions evasion must be reported to the RCMP. For complex compliance inquiries or to confirm if a transaction is permissible, institutions are directed to contact the Global Affairs Canada Sanctions Bureau. When we look at the macro picture of global academia, the tension is clear. While researchers prioritize the free exchange of data, current geopolitical conditions necessitate the enforcement of specific legal boundaries. In an era where applied research fuels advanced military technology, protecting research data is a federal requirement to safeguard Canadian infrastructure. True open science requires the active exclusion of sanctioned actors.